started. Thank you very much for joining us today. The description of this presentation is pretty massive. I think when we proposed it, we didn't know we were going to have 25 minutes. So primarily what we're going to focus on today is alternative credentials, micro-credentials, and importantly, the ecosystems that make those work. So we are seeing that we're in an era where there are pressures for change. And in particular, post-traditional learners are increasingly demanding that their educational opportunities be flexible and affordable. And because of the issues with costs and student loans, they're expecting that whatever time and money they invest in learning opportunities is going to pay off in terms of their employment and career trajectories, not unreasonable expectations. And we're seeing our traditional higher ed institutions respond to some of these challenges. We're also seeing a lot of alternative models arise. You've seen a lot of great presentations at this conference. But one thing that I think is particularly worth calling out is this new attention to the fact that credit does not need to be tied to seat time, and that different ways of assessing learning through direct assessment, personalized learning trajectories, competency-based learning, direct assessment are gaining ground and creating whole new spaces of alternative credentials. So much so that we're seeing that in some areas, the alternative credential could become the preferred mode, because particularly in some vocational areas, the source of the learning really is not that significant compared to some verifiable evidence that the job candidate can actually perform certain skills. And we're going to spend a lot of time today talking about badges because they can provide that portable evidence of those skills. But alternative credentials and micro-credentials, if you want to put badges in the category of micro-credentials, that's one way of thinking about it, they do vary broadly in their quality and their applicability. And if we do think that there's an opportunity, in some cases, for them to displace the need for a traditional degree, there's a lot of work that needs to be done in terms of figuring out what sort of ecosystems validate those credentials. For more background information on this topic, the parts of the description that we're not covering today, you might see in particular in our EDUCAUSE presentation, Fred Hurst talks about Northern Arizona University's personalized learning program, and Kieran Solomon talks about some of the accreditation challenges of balancing appropriate accreditation validation with innovation. So a lot of the materials we're going to go over today are available to you in this MOOC. MOOC here, where the C stands for community. Blackboard, WCET, Sage Road, and Mozilla have collaborated on putting together this community as a framework for collaboration. And at the heart of the community, there's a collection of resources. These resources are all available for reuse. We encourage you to remix them. They're under Creative Commons non-commercial license. These materials provide a scaffolding to learn more about how badge ecosystems work, and there's a series of challenge assignments that walk people through building badge systems, and importantly, not like technology, although there are badge design labs here that pertain to the technology. But more importantly, understanding the stakeholders and the processes that make badge systems effective. Because really, a badge can't stand alone. And again, if we're talking about credentials and micro-credentials, it's important to think about how these work in a complex ecosystem. So the ecosystem analysis that's in the MOOC that I'm going to walk you through today, this is highly adaptable to different kinds of credentialing systems. So if you've been following a track and there's a particular type of alternative credential that you're interested in, you can probably take a lot of what I'm saying today and substitute badge for alternative credential. And you'll see that a lot of these same ecosystem principles are really key. I'm going to walk through the stakeholders very quickly. At the heart of the ecosystem is the learner, particularly the learner who is a person who needs to use their achievements to go out into the world as a job seeker. Because job seekers are often challenged when they try to represent the value of their achievements to persuade prospective employers that they have the competencies and the attributes of the badge seeker and that the employer needs. So the badge can help show how that competency was defined, what skill set they have, who verified that they have that skill set, and even link back to the evidence of what the learner did in order to achieve that badge. So the learner will seek their job-related skills and competencies through some sort of learning provider, and that could be traditional colleges and universities, community colleges, professional education programs, but increasingly it could also be MOOCs, or learning directly from OERs, or learning on the job. And so those learning providers can help them fill the gaps in their skills for career trajectory and gain new knowledge and skills that they might need. And as the competencies are acquired, the learner job seekers can get these badges from the learning providers. But before the badge awards are made, the skills that the badges represent have to be verified, and the verification happens through assessment. This means that the badges are tied to the assessment, not to the learning. Badges don't care where or how competency is acquired, what curriculum the learner went through, whether they went through a curriculum or not. And therefore, the assessment can be decoupled from the learning programs. This leads to really new interesting opportunities in the value exchange system with regard to the relationship between the learners, the learning providers, and the assessors. Now, employers have specific requirements about the attributes and competencies they need in their employees, and these are reflected in their job descriptions, their new hire requisitions, performance reviews, etc. And badges can be a method for communicating from the job seeker to the employer that the job seeker or the current employee who's seeking to advance meets those requirements. But to date, it's been difficult for an employer to determine that what a job seeker says in their application or resume is true. With metadata associated with a badge and authentication technology, the employers have the ability to authenticate the job seeker who presents the badges to substantiate their assertions are indeed the people who earned those badges. And with an open infrastructure like the Mozilla Open Badges infrastructure, that's all part of an ecosystem and not just something that someone can copy and paste in Photoshop and whatever. The competencies that the employers are using often reflect regulations, industry standards, best practices, as those are articulated by standards organizations. And so the standards bodies get input from academic research, from the employers themselves. They keep up with evolving best practices, and then they provide guidance, and in some fields they even provide governance over business practices. So the competencies defined by the standards organizations inform and support this healthy ecosystem, this bridging between the learning providers and the assessors and the employers. When badges are tied to assessments that are themselves tied to industry standards and best practices, the likelihood of finding the right match between the job seeker and the employer is greatly improved. And the learning providers are in a better position to offer the learning programs that actually align with employer requirements. Now, learning providers have traditionally relied on academic accreditation and reputation as validation of the value of their targeted learning outcomes. But because badges are agnostic to the mode of to the mode of learning, the learning providers now have more flexibility in how they engage learners, they personalize learning paths, they offer competency-based learning opportunities. But when they do, traditional learning providers have to work within accreditation and regulatory frameworks. And so this emphasizes the need for clear, transparent validation of the learning providers and their methodologies, because without that, the value of the badges is questionable. And so that's an overview of the ecosystem and how these components fit together. And now Emily's going to give us an example of a real live working ecosystem. And then Anne is going to provide us with some examples of how this is starting to work with regard to employment and careers.
Hi there, I'm Emily, and I work at Mozilla Foundation as a researcher on the Open Badges team. And I worked with many of my colleagues and more than 100 organizations across the city of Chicago this past summer on an initiative called the Chicago Summer of Learning, which really was intended over the course of the summer to focus on a drop-off in learning, or perceived drop-off in learning, that happened over the summer months. And so Mayor Daley, blast from the past. So the mayor's office had asked that we think about digital accreditation and badges as a way to capture the valuable learning that takes place across the city for K through 12 learners over the summer months. And really focus this on job preparation and science, technology, engineering, arts, and mathematics. We worked with more than 100 organizations, which, as you can imagine, is spreadsheet madness, very well organized by some fantastic project managers. Also, in thinking about ways to really prepare youth who potentially were not going into job interviews in the fall, but who really wanted to be gaining skills that would make them job ready when they were ready to, let's say, graduate high school in a year. And so thinking about things like entry-level challenges and how it is that someone whose learning to date had primarily been in the classroom, and how to direct them to learning opportunities across the city that really match their interests, whether that be through the Old Town School of Folk Music and music education, whether that be with the Chicago Botanical Garden, or any number of other participating partners that had content and curricula to share. City level badges, which really were organized between organizations, so thinking really about badges to further and promote interdisciplinary learning, and then challenges, so working with students who had earned a series of badges across the city over the summer months, and we're really ready to put those into use in learner-driven ways. So here you can see a couple of the challenges that were laid out there, this third component. And the neat thing about thinking about these, the particular levels that were designed here, was that there was sort of onboarding built in for every learner, whether they be joining at a young level and really interested in just the badges that one organization had to offer them, or whether they wanted to really shape their summer with free and paid programming across the city, and level up in many ways in STEAM fields. I'm happy to say that nearly 30,000 open badges were issued over the course of the summer to these young learners. Of course, it remains to be seen about the effect that this has on their job readiness, but we're really excited to sort of keep working with the organizations that interacted with these learners over the course of this summer. And this has really shaped Mozilla's thinking in building out the badge kit that I mentioned yesterday, which is a software tool stack intended to create plug-and-play options for badge issuing, assessment, discovery, and more. And so one thing that we learned in looking at some of these badges is that people really wanted to have easy badge building software that, in the range of organizations we work with, there was a wide variety of resource availability, and so everyone wanted access to free open software to be able to design and issue badges that really would make them proud. And so, because of the Chicago Summer of Learning, that's something that will be built out for all badge issuers all over the world, so something we're excited about there. ChicagoSummerofLearning.org.
Thank you, Emily. Hi, everybody. I'm Ann Berry. As Deb hinted at earlier, one of the things that's driving a lot of education reform these days is not just all of the awesome technology that's coming available and policy matters and a number of other factors. But part and parcel of all of this is the unemployment situation that we're facing in this country. Globally, to be sure, but certainly in this country. And we're currently in a position, these numbers have fluctuated a bit since we tracked this data, but there are maybe 11.5 million jobs that are unfilled in this country right now, and there are still 3 million people who have been unable to find work. And so, you know, this prompts us all to ask ourselves and each other, what the heck's going on here? And so what I want to do is show you some examples of what some folks are doing to try to address that very problem. Workforce.io is a joint project of the Living Classrooms Foundation and the Kellogg Foundation. They seek to address the needs of underserved and disenfranchised youth by helping them become workforce ready. And the way that they have chosen to do this is to try to bring together, as you might be able to see across the top here, bring together employers, job seekers, and educators and mentors to all address this problem jointly. When they began to put their program together, they decided first, through their analysis, to focus on what the needs of employers were. And what they found out was that validates what many of us already know, that there's a tremendous skills gap between young people and older people often too, and the jobs that are available. The job posting sites are ineffective, and there's not an easy way to bring all of these people together cohesively so that they can jointly address the very same problem that they're all experiencing at the same time. So what they decided to do was to tackle this from the employer perspective, and they looked at 150, so far they have looked at 150 different entry-level jobs. They've articulated the competencies that are required for each of those jobs, and those jobs fit within 15 different industries. They have attached to those competencies badges which are compliant with Mozilla's Open Badge infrastructure and indeed can be published to the Open Backpack that Mozilla offers. In doing, this is an example of one of the jobs that they put these competencies together for. This is healthcare industry, and it focuses on a patient transporter. And as you can see, they identified 4 different competency areas, each with a series of sub-competencies within those higher level areas, and then they assign badges to each of those. Another example that they've been working on is electricians, and they identified the different job levels that might be possible for an electrician and create the competency maps and then develop the badge system that went along to support those competency maps, and documented how those build over as the job complexity progressed, so that an individual job seeker could come into this and pick out their personal pathway and identify the job that was most relevant and meaningful for them. Here's an indication of how this might work for an individual, Timothy, who comes into this whole arena, and he's had some shop classes and some after-school learning opportunities, and has developed these first competency levels, which nicely enough happen to correspond with a job opening with an electronics manufacturer. But what he notices is that there are additional competencies that are required to get the job that he is targeting for himself, and so he can turn to an instructor of some sort who is qualified to teach him these additional competencies which map back to what the job requires. So the system that Workforce.io provides maps all of these things together in a very easy way for all participants. And they're gaining traction. It's a pretty remarkable story that they're telling. This past summer they did a parallel project to the one that Emily was just describing, and they brought 50,000 young people into and gave them new job opportunities, and they've now expanded this out to Baltimore. They're working with a community college in Grand Rapids, and look to be going into the New Orleans market as well. Another area where we're seeing some very interesting things happen is with vets, returning vets, who are now ready to re-enter the civilian workforce. And as we know, that can be a difficult proposition. The unemployment rate with vets is even higher than it is for the civilian population. And so the Veterans Administration launched this program, which they call Badges for Vets, and the idea with this program was to take the competencies, the skills that a vet has gained through their service, and then convert those into language and skill categories that are recognizable in the civilian world. To date, and this has been running for just 6 months now, so these numbers may look low, but they're really gaining some momentum here, and they've been able to place over 250 vets within 47 different employment situations, and they're working hard to make this even more widely spread. And finally, we have the Manufacturing Institute, which is a part of the National Association of Manufacturers. They have put together an increasingly comprehensive program that defines competencies in various subsectors within manufacturing. They have developed badge systems that represent the competencies within those areas. Those badges are available whether you are demonstrating competence via prior learning situations or engaged in on-the-job training currently that addresses those competencies, and they are able to facilitate both new jobs for people coming into the manufacturing industry, as well as advancement within the industries where they're working. So it looks a little bit like this. This is a view of the program from the student side, and you see that there's this kind of pathway that takes them from their initial coursework, which establishes eligibility requirements, that gives them some badging initially, but then works them through a variety of steps that ultimately take them out to connecting directly to employers, and then pointers out to additional education opportunities to help them advance their pathways, and then other kinds of workplace learning opportunities. And then from the employer perspective, the path is largely the same, but it just takes the employer's view through this. And then when you get out to the end here, all things converge, and the match is made between the job seeker and the employer. I would like to point your attention to an initiative that was announced in June of this year. It's a joint project of the Clinton Family Foundation, the Mark MacArthur Foundation, and Mozilla Foundation, and they have adopted badges as a means to document the kinds of efforts that are being made to bring people into the workforce. And so they have pledged among themselves to badge 1 million students and 1 million workers by 2016. They are inviting others to join and make commitments to support this effort, and you can find out more about what's going on with all of this. Here's the URL down here, 2mbetterfutures.org. So, I made it. So, once again, all of this material is available through the MOOC. Here's the URL down here, badges.coursesites.com. And as Deb said, all of this is remix, reuse, widely distribute. Please take advantage and share with us what your thoughts and activities are as well. And I think there may be 30 seconds for questions. Yes, ma'am.
One quick question. I can totally understand. I think this is awesome, and I can totally understand how it's your focus on the skills to employer training thing. And so I'm thinking, like, what are you thinking of sort of in the future? What might, Mozilla be thinking and your partners be thinking about in the future as regards the kinds of other skills that you gain within, let's say, a formal education process, such as, analytic skills or communication skills or those other skills that don't lead directly to a job, but are important stepping stones towards being ready for a job.
That's in fact one of the things that Workforce.io is focused on. They're very interested in helping with the soft skills side. There are pathways that are clearly articulated for gaining the technical skills that you need for a particular job, but what do you do about all of that soft skill stuff? And Workforce.io is one of the organizations that's working to support those efforts and badging them as well, and communicating with employers about how all of that works, so that these kids can demonstrate not just that they know how to tighten the bolt properly, but also work as a team and show up on time and all of those things that really matter to successful employment. Yeah.
I'm afraid that's all the time we have.
Okay.
Thank you so